To see what has happened to our space program. I actually wrote a section in a book called Window of Opportunity in 1984, talking about what we could have done. We sat, Bob Walker, who was the chair of the Science and Technology Committee and later on headed up the Walker Commission on Aerospace, was with me, and in the early 1980s we interviewed younger NASA scientists. And so I wrote a chapter in Window of Opportunity on what would have happened if we had sustained the momentum of Apollo. And by the 1980s, we would have had a permanent base on the moon, and we would have been on Mars. Just, you go back and look at the extraordinary trajectory. So I want to start, and because I used to be a history teacher, I want to put this in context, because what I'm going to talk to you about today is going to be very, very bold. And it's going to be very different. And it's going to make, frankly, some of the NASA bureaucracy uncomfortable. And there are going to be people in Washington who are going to say, oh my gosh, what if you were actually just flying rather than studying? Well, then, what if you were actually just getting things done instead of having planning meetings? I mean, it would be a frightening change in the current pattern. But let me put it in context. I'm going to use three examples, the third of which is obvious, and that's John F. Kennedy. The first, though, is Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln in 1859 stands on the banks of the Missouri River at Council Bluffs, Iowa, and says, we should build a transcontinental railroad. Now, at the time that he says this, we do not have the steel-making capacity to build the rails to get to California. And we do not have an engine powerful enough to get across the Sierra Nevadas. In 1869, the railroad is complete. Lincoln, however, is a fascinating study in the American passion for technology and progress. In 1832, as a very young man of 23, he runs for the state legislature for the first time. Part of his platform is to build a railroad in Illinois. Now, what makes this amazing is that the first railroad, the rocket built by Stephenson in Great Britain, is 1829. The first railroad engine to reach the United States is 1831. Lincoln has never seen a train. But he's read about it, and he has imagination, and he knows that the prairie's long, and he knows that a train would be better than walking. And so he's campaigning in 1832 on an idea. The idea of progress. And I'm going to give you a few Lincolnian visions on space in a minute. Second, the Wright brothers. This is my core critique of NASA, and frankly of all government science in its current form, with the possible exception of DARPA. In the late 19th century, people were sort of right at the edge of flight. They kind of almost knew how to do it. They almost had the right engines. They were all looking at birds. And there were two parallel American projects that are fascinating. The Smithsonian, arguably at that time the greatest scientific institution in the country, had a $50,000 grant from Congress to learn how to fly. And the Smithsonian had very smart scientists, and they had connections to the best scientists in Germany and the best technicians and the best metallurgists. So they could order a really cool engine. Meanwhile, in Dayton, Ohio, there were two brothers who ran a bicycle shop. Now, bicycles in the 1890s were a high-end technology. They actually merited a discussion in the census report of 1890 on the fact that bicycles were widespread. They were allowing teenagers to escape from their parents. And there were many sociological side effects of this new revolution. So the Wright brothers are here, and in their spare time, they're fascinated with flight. They actually build a wind tunnel. These are not unsophisticated people. They build a wind tunnel, they study birds. They go to the U.S. government for important weather information. Where is the most continuous updraft in the United States? Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Comes off the ocean, comes up a hill. So the Wright brothers, for several years, go down to Kitty Hawk every summer, and they take a lot of wood. Now, the reason they take a lot of wood is they know something very profound. They don't know how to fly. This may seem obvious, but trust me, most government planners don't get this. So what do the Wright brothers do? They get up in the morning, they have built a very light plane with a very weak engine. And it's going to start at the top of the hill, it's going to go downhill, it's going to have an updraft, and it crashes. They average 6 or 7 crashes a day. And they'd stop, they'd fix it, they'd think about it, talk about it, have some more coffee, and they'd try it again. This goes on for several years. Finally, in December of 1903, they have the first powered flight in history. One brother runs alongside the plane to make sure it doesn't flip over. It doesn't fly fast enough to get ahead of it. The entire first flight is shorter than the wingspan of a Boeing 747. And it never gets high enough to get over the fuselage of a 747. Small article in AP. That's December 7, 1903. In 1907, they made enough progress that they fly around the island of Manhattan, and 1.5 million people see an airplane for the first time. 4 years. Because they figured out the core thing, which is how to fly. Now, by contrast, the Smithsonian, being a large government establishment of great prestige with too much money, orders from Germany a really cool engine. Now, there's a problem with a really cool engine. It's heavy. And if you have a heavy engine, you have to build a heavy plane. And if you have a heavy engine and a heavy plane and you're a Washington bureaucrat, you don't want to go to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, which was nowhere. I mean, Kitty Hawk was so isolated, these guys lived in a tent. And so you say, well, how am I going to get wind? And you invent something which we still use today. A catapult on a boat. The precursor of the modern aircraft carrier. And you put it in the Potomac. Because you're going to launch it off a boat. Because you're smart and you have a theoretical study. And you invite the news media to come and watch your very first test. You all probably know where this is going. So, they get out there in the morning, the mist comes off the river, they launch the plane, and it goes straight into the water. Now, here's the problem. When you have a plane land on ground, it's fairly easy to recover it. When you have a plane that is heavier than water land in the Potomac River, it goes down, the current tears it up, and you have no idea what was wrong. It's a one-time perfection problem. Now, the Smithsonian is deeply embarrassed because they look like fools. And then they get this Associated Press report that 2 bicycle mechanics have flown. The Smithsonian hostility to the Wright brothers was so great that the Wright brothers would not give them the original airplane for 37 years. Because bureaucracies hate things that aren't invented in the bureaucracy. There may be a lesson here for people in NASA and the Air Force. Okay? I'm coming around here. Bear with me. For example, May 1961. And this is the model for what I'm about to talk to you about. May 1961. John F. Kennedy, representing a new generation, having taken power from Dwight David Eisenhower, launching a new sense of a new frontier, announces to the Congress, we will go to the moon before the end of the decade. We did a movie called City Upon a Hill, and we have Buzz Aldrin in the movie. And he is so convincing. He said, you have to realize, the only person who had gone around the Earth at that point was Yuri Gagarin, a Russian. And the only American who'd been in space had been in a suborbital flight. And here's the president saying, we will get to the moon inside this decade. And you had to invent everything. We had all sorts of precursors. We had the V2, and we had this, and we had that. The truth was, if you listed every problem they solved by July of 1969, it's It's one of the great periods of development in human history. And they just did it. So, and I'm giving this background for our friends in the news media because twice recently Governor Romney has made fun of me for having bold ideas in space. And he suggested that, you know, the idea of going up a permanent lunar colony, he actually didn't catch the weirdest thing I've ever done, I'm going to tell you all, because sooner or later his researchers will find it. At one point early in my career, I introduced the Northwest Ordinance for Space. And I said when we got, I think the number's 13,000, when we have 13,000 Americans living on the moon, they can petition to become a state. And here's the difference between romantics and so-called practical people. I wanted every young American to say to themselves, I could be one of those 13,000. I could be a pioneer. I need to study science and math and engineering. I need to learn how to be a technician. I can be part of building a bigger, better future. I can actually go out and live the future looking at the solar system and being part of a generation of courageous people who do something big and bold and heroic. And I will, as president, encourage the introduction of the Northwest Ordinance for Space to put a marker down. That we want Americans to think boldly about the future, and we want Americans to go out and study hard and work hard, and together we're going to unleash the American people to rebuild the country we love. So, I'm going to give you a set of goals, and then I'm going to make a set of observations about how to achieve those goals. By the end of my second term, we will have the first permanent base on the moon, and it will be American. Commercial, near-Earth activities that include science, tourism, and manufacturing, and are designed to create a robust industry precisely on the model of the development of the airlines in the 1930s, because it is in our interest to acquire so much experience in space that we clearly have a capacity that the Chinese and the Russians will never come anywhere close to matching. We will have the first continuous propulsion system in space capable of getting to Mars in a remarkably short time, because I am sick of being told we have to be timid, and I'm sick of being told we have to be limited to technologies that are 15 years old. Candidly, if we truly inspire the entrepreneurial spirits of America, we may get some of this stuff a lot faster. Now, I'm going to make some modest observations and some big observations. Modest observation number one. We should be practical about using equipment. That is, for example, the Atlas V ought to be interchangeable and ought to be as usable for NASA projects as it is for Air Force projects. We should get in the habit of absorbing small units of space. You know, it's very difficult right now to get the bureaucracy to think about the fact somebody's about to launch a commercial launch, and it actually has an extra little space for 40 pounds, but that doesn't fit either the NASA or the military model. When we fly troops around, we normally fly them on commercial airliners with other people. So we're used to the idea that you can share space. You can send things that don't have to be a military-only aircraft or a NASA-only aircraft. I suspect even the NASA administrators actually fly on commercial planes with other people. So I want to know if we break down all the bureaucratic barriers and we go to what I'm going to call a common sense model. If it's cheaper, faster, and it works, do it. Second, we need to learn how to do 5 or 8 launches a day, not 1. We need to get in a habit of saying, this is going to be like an airport. We're going to be so busy. I mean, if we're going to get to the moon permanently and we're going to start getting to Mars and we're going to build this near-Earth capability and do it all within 8 years, we better start thinking more like airports than like space systems. We better start figuring out, okay, so how are we going to manage this many things? It's not that we can't do it, it's just that we don't push ourselves, we don't think about it, we don't design the systems for it. But I want constant activity. I want something, there's a reason. The World War II generation built tons of airplanes, so the designers that came out of World War II had made lots of mistakes. And they learned from them. If you're a military aircraft designer today, you're lucky if you work with more than 1 airplane in your lifetime. That's how slow and cumbersome and bureaucratic they are. You don't have any learning curve. I want us to have so much constant, energetic, excited activities that people are learning again. And that we're drawing the best talent in the country right back to the Space Coast because it's exciting and it's dynamic. And who knows what next week is going to be like. And does that mean I'm a visionary? You betcha. I was attacked the other night for being grandiose. I just want you to know. Lincoln standing at Council Bluffs was grandiose. The Wright brothers going down to Kitty Hawk was grandiose. John F. Kennedy standing there saying we'll get to the moon in 8 years was grandiose. I accept the charge that I am an American, and Americans are instinctively grandiose. Understand where I'm coming from. I very much believe in a project you can Google called Strong America Now, which is an effort to develop Lean Six Sigma for the federal government. I believe we have got to become agile, lean, competent, constantly evolving, and that means replacing the civil service laws that are 130 years old with a totally new practical management system that comes much closer to the way Boeing is doing the Dreamliner. Clifton and I went down to Boeing in outside Charleston. And they were walking us through how they use Lean Six Sigma. And I don't know how many of you know this, but this is just an example. The Dreamliner is built in Italy, Wichita, Tokyo, Japan, and Korea. And is flown in units that are then brought together at Charleston. And they were walking around and they said, now this particular work area currently takes 16 days. Our goal is to get it down to 6 with the same number of people. And I looked at it and I thought to myself, Department of Housing and Urban Development. So let's be honest. I could have said Air Force Space Command. I could have said NASA. I mean, we want to become lean and aggressive. And here's my bias. They told me that the Corps of Engineers, in order to improve the Port of Charleston so that it can receive ships that will start coming through the Panama Canal in 2014 when they finish widening it, that to do the study of the project takes 8 years. Not the project, the study. I said to them, we fought the Second World War in 3 years and 8 months. So we beat Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan in 44 months. I want to imprint this on you, okay? Because if I become your president, you're going to see that is up to God and the American people, and I don't want to be presumptuous, so I'm going to stick with it. If I become your president, you will have a 365-day-a-year relentless pressure to be faster, quicker, leaner, more innovative, more thoughtful, more daring, more visionary. And so let's go back to how to do it. I would want 10% of the NASA budget set aside for prize money. Lindbergh flies to Paris for $25,000. You set up prizes. You know, for example, I forget what the Bush administration estimate was, but it was something like $450 billion to get to Mars with a manned mission. So let's put up $10 billion. And if somebody figures it out, we saved, $440 billion. If they don't figure it out, it didn't cost us anything. But you'll have, for $10 billion, and I'd make it tax-free because Americans love things tax-free so much. It's not a monetary value. It's the psychic thrill. This is why you're going to have to learn to have a lot more launches every day, because if we put up the right prizes and we think, and Bob Walker and I, actually shortly after I left Congress, we were part of a 2-day National Academy of Engineering workshop on prizes, which it's online and it was published. And we were talking about the historic use of prizes going back to the 17th century. You put up a bunch of interesting prizes, you're going to have so many people showing up who want to fly. It's going to be unbelievable. So the model I want us to build is largely the model of the 20s and 30s, when the government was actively encouraging development, but the government wasn't doing it. The government was paying rewards, it was subsidizing the airmail, it was doing a variety of things. There were prizes, Jimmy Doolittle got famous winning prize money before World War II. Then he got famous for bombing Tokyo. He had a life that was very interesting. But we had enormous breakthroughs in aviation in the 20s and 30s at very little cost to the government, because lots of smart people did it. And this is my closing bias, I just want to share it. I want people cutting metal, or nowadays, I guess you would say, creating various synthetics. I mean, the Dreamliner is a composite aircraft. So I want people pouring composite. Is that a more accurate way to think of it now? Actually, they wrap it. It comes in it. It's very strange. For a guy my age, you're looking at that thinking, I'm going to fly in this. Although it is apparently stronger than aluminum and more durable. But here's the point. We'd be better off to do 1% of the current studies and 10 times as many experiments that just fly it. If it doesn't work, walk off and go, well, that was kind of interesting. There's a great story of Bernie Schreiber, who had been the great leader in Air Force ICBM development, calling his successor. And he said, you've had 17 successful launches. And the guy said with great pride, you're right. And he said, you're not trying. Because if you'd been trying, you'd inevitably made mistakes. You're only doing stuff that's safe, you already know how to do. So I came here today to ask you, because you're here. You know people all over the country who believe in space. You know how exciting it can be at its best. You know what a total mess, what an embarrassment our current situation is. How can we build a bureaucracy this big and get into a period where we rely on the Russians while we watch the Chinese plan to surpass us, and we sit around bureaucratically twiddling our thumbs with no real reform? I want you to help me, both in Florida and across the country, so that you can someday say, you were here the day it was announced that of course we'd have commercial space and near space. Of course we'd have a manned colony on the moon that flew an American flag. And of course we'd be moving towards Mars by the end of the next decade. After all, we are Americans, and you were there at the beginning of the second great launch of the adventure that John F. Kennedy started. Thank you very, very much.